Bueno, pues buenas tardes a todas y a todos.
Good morning, everyone, and greetings also to those who will follow us on our YouTube channel. We are going to continue with this first session of the Charles V European Award Doctorate Seminar. The fortune of being together, guaranteeing and ensuring and strengthening the cohesion of Europe. I would like to give the floor to Mr. Juan Carlos Moreno Piñero, who's the director of the Yuste Foundation, who is going to introduce the next speaker, Amós del Castillo. The topics that will be covered by Amós are very dear to Mr. Moreno Piñero's work. So we will hear Del Castillo's presentation, and then as we did this morning, we will move on to the discussion, and we will hear your reflections and contributions. So without any further ado, Mr. Moreno Juan Carlos, the floor is yours. Thank you very much, Miguel. After lunch, I was coming here and thinking that maybe we should complain to the leaders of this seminar, because it's not fair that I have to speak after lunch at 3 p.m. But then I realized, oh, I'm one of the leaders of this course, so I can't complain to myself. It would be ridiculous. So, okay. I hope that this presentation goes well. I'm sure that Amos's presentation will be very interesting. I didn't ask for permission to the other co-directors of the course to change the structure, but I'm going to do so. I'm going to change the structure a little bit. My colleagues this morning did their presentations after we heard the researcher, but I'm going to do it the other way around. What Amos going to say is going to be much more interesting than what I will say, but what I would like to do is to give a little context about these two mega events that he is going to talk about. I would also want to mention that I am familiar with all your works. I was part of the jury that assessed your candidacies, and not only have I read all your contributions, I hold them in very high esteem, and I wish to congratulate you all. So, had I been in the place of introducing any of you, I would be very happy. But I must recognize, and I don't know if the other two directors of the course agree, well, for whatever reason it is, I have had to focus on Amos's research, and I'm very happy about it. It really drew my attention, and I'm going to read the notes that I was taking while I was assessing his request or his candidacy. Amos is going to talk about community funds and mega events in Southern Europe, a historical approach to the case of the Seville World Expo and the Athens Olympic Games. We come from different backgrounds. Amos is a historian and I'm a lawyer, a jurist. But I was very interested by the fact that he talked about Athens and Seville. I know Athens. I wasn't there in the Olympic Games in 2004, but I watched them on TV. And I do know Seville very well. I lived there for a few years. And in addition to that, this process that Amos is going to discuss spans all the change, the urbanistic change in Seville. And this is something that I experienced while I was living in Seville when I was a law student. I was a young student. I'm not young anymore, but I'm still a student. When you're a student, you don't have much money, but you have time. So what you do in your free time is to walk, sometimes by myself or other times with people. But whether alone or with others, I have the opportunity to witness how the city was transformed thanks to European structural funds. So we have two places, Athens and Seville. We are missing a third stakeholder for this film to have a complete cast. So what completes the cast is the European Union and its structural funds. I said that I was going to provide a historic context. Why did these two events take place? These events that Amos is going to tell us about. Why did Seville want to hold a World Fair in 1992? Well, there are several reasons. The first one is its strong connection with Ibero-American. Seville wanted to leverage on this connection, considering that the ships that came in the 15th and 16th century and 17th century from America sailed up the Guadalquivir all the way to the city. So Seville wanted to relive this past. The 5th anniversary of the discovery of America was approaching 1992, and there was the memory of the 1929 World Fair. And remember that the typing played with those numbers with the intention of remembering and honoring that 1929 World Fair that changed the city in the first fourth of the 20th century. And lastly, there was this rivalry thing. Those of you who are familiar with Andalusia and Seville, you know that people there are very much about, oh, that person can't be any more than me. So it turns out that when Seville wanted to become the place where the World Fair would take place, the Chicago candidacy appeared, and there was this rivalry. So Andalusian said it will be us, and it was them. So what about Athens? Why did Athens want to host the Olympic Games? In a way, because they want to relive the past of the classic Greece. But they did not want to hold the 2004 games. They wanted to hold the 1996 games. That is, they wanted to celebrate the 100th anniversary of the modern games. So this 1996 candidacy had Athens as the favorite city, and they made it to the last round, and there was a last sprint where Atlanta won the race. Some people say that Coca-Cola money was behind that voting, and Atlanta won the voting. So the 2000 games went to Sydney, but Atlanta won the 2004. So what was I? Sorry, they won in 1996. And why was Europe interested in this? Europe wanted to attract two cities and two countries. Greece overcame a dictatorship in 1974. Spain started overcoming dictatorship in 1975. Greece accessed the EU in 91, and in Spain on January 1st, 1986. Therefore, Europe, in a way, wanted to attract those two countries that were embarking on their Europeanist path, and they wanted to establish that North-South discussion or dialogue. This led to huge investments and to changing two cities. And it was more than that. It wasn't only two cities that changed. They became attraction poles for a region and for a country. Seville? Did everything go to Seville? Yes and no. Seville, and I was witness to that, changed dramatically. Seville, pre-1992, was very different to what it became after 92. Seville built 7 internal roads, a peripheral highway, 6 bridges over the Guadalquivir River, and it recovered the river for the city. And what's more, it started restructuring Spain because the first high-speed rail was not Barcelona-Madrid, it was Madrid-Seville that was the first high-speed train. It was publicized as a way to make it possible for travelers to reach Seville. But that was a way of structuring modern Spain. Let us not forget, this must be said, that the president of the government at the time was Felipe González, and the vice president was Alfonso Guerra. Both were from Seville. So the structure of the city and the structure of Andalusia and Spain started shifting. And there's something else. Something that was good about the money that was invested in Seville for 1992 is that most of the facilities in the island of La Cartuja were reused. What happened to Athens? Let us not forget that the Athens Olympic Games were the first Olympic Games that took place after September 11th. That involved extra security measures. At the same time, some not very well-to-do areas in the outskirts of Athens started being refurbished. And this didn't always happen in the right way. Because, for example, there was a rowing channel that was built near Marathon, and this was built on lands that should not have been used for that purpose, and that caused problems. Let me finish. We have 2 cities, Seville and Athens. We have 2 regions, Andalusia and Attica, 2 countries, Spain and Greece. Main objective, Europe, developing the structural development of least favored regions that had a GDP below 75% of the European average. Thanks to structural funds, EU structural funds, these 2 mega events that were going to be leisure, sports events, started transforming 2 cities, 2 regions, and 2 countries. And more than anything, started creating a north-south balance in Europe. But all of this will be presented with more criteria by Amós. I just wanted to give some background for you to understand what Amós is going to explain to us brilliantly. The floor is yours.
Bueno, en primer lugar, muchísimas gracias, Juan Carlos.
First of all, thank you, Juan Carlos, for several reasons. First of all, for speaking right after lunch and waking us all up, and then for throwing out some ideas, throwing some ideas to the audience and from my topic that I will be covering later. And the third one is for having me here, for choosing me, because this is a very privileged forum. Well, the title of my intervention, as Juan Carlos said, is Mega Events and European Fans. Community fans and mega events in Southern Europe, a historical approach to the case of the Seville World Expo and the Athens Olympic Games. So we were discussing earlier, is this your whole PhD thesis? Is just a branch of it? Is it what? Well, my thesis is a comparative study of 3 mega events, big events in Southern Europe, in the periphery of Europe, that little by little starts converging into Europe after the democratization processes in the 70s and the accession in the 80s. Well, in the beginning, I was going to do my research on 4 events because I was including the Barcelona Olympic Games, but then I discarded it and focused on 3. And I need to say this because the structural funds played a role in that decision because Catalonia was not a target region, level 1, because it was not below the 75% development level of the rest of the European Union, and the industrialization process was in full fling there. So then I decided to focus on 3 cases, 3 countries in the European Union. The 3 countries joined the European Union at the same time. And then so I want to highlight the role of the mega events in the implementation of a post-industrial development system with the help of the structural funds. So I will not be focusing on the celebration of the events. I will not be talking about basketball or pavilions. I will be talking about how they were used to foster a development that had consequences for the regions and the nation as a whole, as Juan Carlos said. I also want to say that this research does not come out of the blue. It's not just the fruit of my genius. I'm taking the relay from the previous researchers in 15 years, the last 15 years, based on several myths that need to be debunked. For example, some triumphalism that used to be defended in the creation of Europe. And then I also wanted to interrelate the European integration process with other historical processes that took place in parallel. For example, the end of the Cold War, or even the Cold War at the beginning, or the decolonization process, or the advances of the capitalism model in the 20th century. And then I also wanted to include new actors, new stakeholders, new chronologies, new timelines, because you know that the young researchers need to base our research on the new archives that are being opened. So we now can reap the benefits of exploring the archives that were set up in the 90s. And then I also wanted to highlight the work of some historians, Priyanka Spater, who talks about the importance of understanding not just the European integration process by understanding the structures or the institutions, and also the Europeanization, the process of becoming a European citizens by finding similarities. I also wanted to highlight something else. Since this is a multidisciplinary seminar, I also want to talk about the social gender approaches. That is the elephant in the room. What on earth is a mega event? It comes from the Anglo-Saxon terminology. I like say mega event, and that's why I use it, but it comes from the English-speaking literature. So a mega event, by definition, by Maurice Roche from the year 2000, it's a large-scale event of sports or arts nature that is for the masses. And I also want to add that these events have a transformative capacity. For example, Eurovision changes maybe just the stadium or the neighboring streets. But think about the impact of the Olympic Games or FIFA World Cup, because they have consequences for longer than the time they take place, even 10 years, according to some authors, 10 years after the event finishes. So we have to think about the scale, the aftermath of the event. Think about Athens, think about Seville, and think about the region, Attica in the case of Athens or Andalusia in the case of Seville. So I use this large-scale factor. According to geologists, scale is just a large definition of this space. or even the supranational or international space. So after this introduction, this was the background, and I wanted to talk about the structure of the rest of the work. It's a very simple structure. Two questions. Why a mega event? Why is a mega event used as a development tool? And then I will develop the cases of Athens and Seville. And the second question is, what was the role of the community funds in both events? Then some conclusions and limitations to this research, because my idea is to use the money from the scholarship to take a look at some archives that I haven't been able to analyze so far. So, first things first, at an international scale, I need to talk about the works of former historians and geographers that look at the broad processes that frame the mega events. My research tries to complement the national narratives of why these events take place. This is fundamental in the case of Seville. There is a link with Latin America. In Athens, of course, the classic Olympic Games were important for the decision. But if we look at the changes those two cities were facing at the end of the 20th century, those challenges shape the way those mega events took place. You all know that in the last decades of the 20th century, there was an increase of the trade flows and the flows of capitals and people, which led to the term globalization to be coined. And then so these two cities started competing with other cities because there is more competitiveness, there is a big market, and then cities have to compete with other cities to attract the flows of tourists and to be able to trade with other cities. So cities are also places of services, no longer places of products or goods, but places of services. They offer services to people and companies. So the mega events are like a renewal project and a new urban planning, urban renewal project, just like the Guggenheim Museum in Bilbao. And then I want to focus on Spain and Seville 1992. I want to talk about each of the levels and how they shaped the development policy that was created as a result. Let's talk about the state first. The state wanted to create a successful event, the international arena of public diplomacy. For example, Julio Sanz in 1990 wrote 1992, Spain in the World, because at the same time there was the Olympic Games in Barcelona or Sephora 1992 in Toledo. So through this foreign policy, governments wanted to change the idea or the image people had about Spain in the aftermath of the dictatorship. So when you look at all this money, billions of euros, you realize that it's not just about the image of Spain abroad. It's also about some territorial development. This post-industrial development model, it's like the high-speed train Juan Carlos mentioned. And you might think, well, it was about to happen. It had to be created. Well, why? It was included in the new railway plan for Andalusia because after Spain's adhesion to the European Union, the government decided to adapt all the railway system to the European railway system, because we used to have a different width in between the railway tracks. And so they decided at the same time to create the first high-speed train between Madrid and Seville on the occasion of the Expo, Universal Exhibition. And at the same time, it was great for workers, the white-collar workers, to travel between Madrid and Seville, and also for tourists. Because if you look at what kind of people use the highway, the high-speed train, it's precisely white-collar workers and tourists for the last 30 years. And then what about the regional or the local government? The Expo 92 was fundamental for them because it took place in a decentralization context. Through the 80s, this mega event enabled the government of Andalusia to implement this territory policy, because thanks to the resources they got from this event, they were able to structure the region. Andalusia has many mountains, has many mountain ranges in the eastern part. So they started to work on this event as soon as possible, and they created a highway. It's called A92. And they also wanted to use the money and the benefits, the profits generated by those funds among the territory. So they created a special fund and spent it on a program by signing conventions with city councils in all the provinces, in all 8 provinces, so that all provinces could build cultural spaces like Seville. For example, they wanted every province to have something new and to organize other type of events. For example, the Sailing Cup in 1994 and some other sports events. Well, Seville is especially interesting because the city wanted to be more competitive as opposed to Barcelona, where the mayor and the city council was really behind the project. The city council, the Seville City Council, didn't really have a say, but it benefited from the resources made available. And so, as Juan Carlos said, they decided to do more projects around the river. They built more bridges. They demolished some walls that divided the city. They built a new station, a new train station. If you've ever been to Santa Justa station, you know what I mean, because it's completely incredible. It was made thanks to those funds. And Seville is the smallest city to have ever hosted a universal exhibition. It's only 700,000 people, and 200 hectares were transformed with an investment of 600 million euros. It was a very hard challenge for such a small city. And the relationship between the central government and the Seville City Council was tense, was strained. So it was not done behind the back of the government, I would say, but there was some strain and some tensions between both institutions. And I want to show you the minutes of the meeting between the central government and the city council. And you can read there that the city council was rejecting the whole plan. They don't want to accept the renovation of the La Cartuja area. So what I wanted to say with all this is that the city council was not a leader. It wasn't leading this project. It was the central government that did it. So that was about Seville and Expo 92. And now Athens. I have to say that the situation of the urban planning in Athens, in Greece, until the 70s was very complex. There was some urban planning that because there weren't many clear instructions on urban planning, but once the PASOK took the power, there was a change. At the beginning of the 80s, this party wanted to clear some parts of Athens. In 1985, they created a decongestion plan, but then they realized it wasn't going to work because back then, Athens were the main economic centers of the country. So they decided to enter a coalition with another political party. They signed an alliance with also some other private groups and company associations, and they decided to do something else. And they decided to submit their candidacy for the Olympic Games that shaped the big development lines that resulted in a successful candidacy in 2004. If you compare the candidacy in 1993 with the one in 2004, the 2004 one is pro-Europe. You can see the Europe flag everywhere. And so it's interesting in that sense. You will also see some national changes that modifies the situation in Greece. One of the changes is Kostas Simitis from the Pan-Hellenic Party in 1996. And this president wanted to join the Eurozone as a priority. And then the second pillar of his program was the Olympic Games, to show an image of modern Greece. There was a third factor. After the fall of the communist regimes in the Balkan states, Greece is a new leader in the region. And the Olympic Games was like a signal or indicator of that aspiration. So we find two fundamental pillars that I want to highlight. Athens needed a whole network, a whole new network of infrastructures if it wanted to host the Olympic Games. For example, a new highway that it's like it's called Attiki 02. It's a new ring road that connects with a new international airport, the Eleftherios Venizelos. So it's again large scale. But there were many more changes. For example, in the suburban network, the suburban railway network, all the metro network, the subway network. The whole city needs to become attractive for all visitors. What is most attractive in Athens? Well, the architectural heritage. And the structural funds are used precisely to revamp them and to create new itineraries between the Acropolis and the Hadrian's library, etc. And then the third pillar is the connection between the city, Athens, and the sea, the Faleron area. It was included in the Candidas in 1996, but then in 2004, it was further strengthened with the creation of new sports equipment and sports building in the area. And then I will be talking about the impacts of the structural funds. But let me talk first about the context of the community funds in the 80s. So, the community funds were part of Europe since the very first days, with the Treaty of Rome, the Agricultural Guarantee Fund, 1966, and the regional funds, the 1970s. But then when Spain, Greece, and Portugal joined the European Union and the Maastricht Treaty was signed, that marked the beginning of the cohesion policy. And then there was a reform in 1988, which was influential for the mega events because there were many more resources available. That's how we can understand the large scale of these mega events. With the first package, the LORS, until 1992. And then the funds were like diversified. We have the social funds, the agricultural funds, and then a new term was coined, structural funds. You can see that the main aim was to promote the development and the cohesion of the regions that are underdeveloped. And there is where we can find Attica and Andalusia. And then we have the multi-annual plans, as Hugo said, for the optimization of those funds. And then in 1994, we had the cohesion fund with some other reforms, but the foundation for all these funds was laid here. So that was the first half of my intervention. Now I will begin the second half. If you look at the community framework in Andalusia, the support framework network in Andalusia said that they needed more cohesion in the territory, that they needed to find or diversify the income methods. They don't want to use the old tourism model. They want to create a new leisure industry. They wanted to become more competitive. They wanted to adopt new technologies. And that's why the Cartuja 93 Scientific and Technological Park was created. Because you need to know that the structural funds were not used to create the area for the Expo 92. They were used for other projects that were created later in the La Cartuja Island. For example, the Technology and Science Park. And for example, for the high-speed train, the price was 3 billion euros. It was a substantial investment. And also the highway, the A92. In 1992, Andalusia got 27% of all the regional funds allocated to Spain. Andalusia is only 17% of the population and 13% of the GDP. So it was a huge investment. 1.5 billion euros were spent on infrastructure. But this is ambivalent, right? Because the citizens, of course, benefited from all this, undoubtedly, because many of the equipment created for the Expo 92 are still used today, but it was very complex because we can find many contradictions in there. Think about the tech park Cartuja 93. It was the result of a research project led by Castells and Holt, one of the biggest ideologists of this post-industrial model, the era of the information, a classic book by Manuel Castells. They wanted to create a very competitive space, but on the occasion, on the creation of the single markets in 1993, it is similar to the Nice Tech Park, Sophia Antipolis in Antibes. Sorry, not Nice, in Antibes in France. And at the end of the event, Expo 92, that also benefited from many other fans, Stark or some other fans, was not done exactly the way it was planned for, because there was a clash between the initial planning and the social and the political reality of the city of Seville. In 1991, there were local elections in Seville right before Expo 92, and the ruling party did not manage to win the elections. Well, they won the elections, but they didn't manage to get a coalition because Rojas Marcos, the new mayor, decided to support the Expo 92, unlike the previous ruling party, and so they decided to create a theme park because they said we need a lot of jobs. We need a theme park. That was at the beginning of the Cartuja 93 Tech Park, but the theme park was not successful. It didn't make it through. So they abandoned the project and decided to create the tech park instead. Cartuja 93 generates 8% of the GDP of the province. But look at this in 2025. This was a result of a fire. And it was because of a very bad decision that was made without taking into account the reality of the city. It was maybe too ambitious because there wasn't enough training in the city. There wasn't enough knowledge in the city for it to be successful. It could be successful now.
Now, moving to the case of Athens, I am going to refer specifically to the community support framework for the Attica region that states specifically that Attica needs to be integrated in the world knowledge in the knowledge structure. Priorities are very similar in both cases. To relaunch Athens as the gate between Europe and Asia, connectivity with the outside world, renovate structures. That highway that I mentioned cost 900 of the 1600 from the European Investment Funds, ERFVs, and the cohesion funds too, that focused mostly on infrastructures and environmental equipment. What I'm trying to transmit is that this renovation, this development project that had started at the end of the 80s, thanks to these structural funds, reaches an unprecedented scale in Attica and for Athens. Here we can talk about the renewal of the archaeological heritage. As I mentioned previously, the Adriana's Acropolis and the Fibrous Bay. If you visit Athens, that is to the south of the urban center, and it has been refurbished. The whole coast has been refurbished. What happens here? Just as it happened in Seville, and this, in the case of Athens, has to do with the hard integration of the Olympic Games in the strategic planning of the city, unlike what happened in Barcelona. That has always been promoted as a story of success, and it is partly the model of Barcelona did some specific interventions to promote the Olympic Games. So, in the case of Athens, there is no such integration, and there is a clear economic benefit, but then there are contradictions too. Juan Carlos mentioned here the case of the rowing center of Skinias that is located in the emblematic landscape of Marathon, where there are very important wetlands. They were protected by the Aves regulation and the habitat regulations that define protected spaces. It's a specific bird protection area. So this new rowing center went against this legislation. You can see here how this is a rowing center that is being built on top of a wetland. Environmentally, there is no way of defending this. What they did was that the World Nature Fund, the WWF, started complaining and went to the European Commission and the game organizers saying that this was horrible and it infringed the European legislation. And there is the conditionality principle for the provision of European funds. So if you violate European funds, you shouldn't be receiving European funds. If you infringe, European laws, you should not be receiving any funds. So what happens here is that corrective measures come into place. So what happened was that a new park was created in the area and is working relatively well, although the rowing center was abandoned for some years and it is being recovered lately. To be fair, there can be a successful recovery of the area after the games, as it seems to be happening now. To recap some of the topics that I mentioned, how can structural funds become a leverage for post-industrial development in regions that didn't have such a powerful industrial development, but thanks to the democratization and European integration process, these spaces can have a space. Attica wanted to become a center of services with good infrastructures, tourist attraction, and structural funds can act as a vector to do this. There are historic aspects. Nothing happens in isolation. And there is a process that decentralization in Spain, this is clear, but this decentralization is complex. The city plays an important role in this scenario of competitiveness, while the town council does not have a leadership role. So these are contradictions that are interesting. Then another interesting factor is how there's a correlation between the structural funds and the development of mega events that was planned in the 80s. And there are reports before Spain accessed the European Union that claim that there are structural funds that we could use to carry out these infrastructure works that we want to start. There are reports that say this clearly. So there's a clear connection between this reform of structural funds and the mega events. Then there are ambivalent impacts. Ambivalent because there can be different visions. Ambivalent because indeed there is an unprecedented development in territories and in the regions, in Attica and in Andalusia. So Andalusian structures, if you compare to other regions in Europe, like the Italian Mezzogiorno, has wonderful structures, infrastructures. So the impact in this way was really positive. Here we must mention my colleague Neves's presentation, we have to think about how negotiations take place and how the structural funds are awarded. Is there citizen participation here? The positions of local powers are taken into consideration. Here we have to talk about democratic legitimacy. We have to think about whether there's sufficient deliberation. This really brings me to the presentation this morning, Hugo's presentation. So I want to thank him for setting the paving the way for my presentation. I would like to talk about the weaknesses of my research, or maybe possible potential opportunities for the future.
Bueno, siempre me gusta decir que los historiadores
I really like it how historians come when everything has happened after politologists, economists, and jurists have done their work. So we go to archives and we see what happened. So that's what I want to do here. I want to establish the post-industrial development process. There is a series of transference processes. There are networks. There model, a development model is not implemented automatically. Here, I want to refer to the epistemic communities notion defined by Peter Haas, which is a network of professionals that have recognized competencies in a specific domain. For example, land planners. How do land planners think about these post-industrial development models? How do these urban planners consider or think about world fairs or Olympic Games? Before Expo 92, the delegates of this event went to visit all the expos that took place in these times. They went to Fukua in Japan, they went to Vancouver in 96, Brisbane 98. So there is a whole process of knowledge transfer. It's not just something that happens nationally. Of course, it's a national effort, but in addition to that, there's knowledge transfer. So these transfer processes need to be analyzed. And for this, we need to consult the sources. And we have to also consult sources on community funds to see if there were any contradictions. For example, if there was someone who was not in agreement with the program that had been established for Andalusia, whether there were divergent voices, whether locally what was going to be done makes sense. There were urban planners who said that these unique single venues with pavilions was a huge mistake. And this was said before the Expo was built. Sources can help us analyze this development narrative. In the field of European history, we have to see processes from the grassroots levels, how neighbors reacted. And I will have to see how this happened in Greek, because I don't read Greek, but I will have to analyze this. So this grassroots vision gives us nuanced vision about what the real impact was of the grant, what the social impact was of the implementation of these structural funds. And I think that this is a contribution that a historian like me can offer. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Amos. I'm going to give the floor to Juan Carlos in case he wants to make any comment about your presentation. I simply want to congratulate you, Amos. You said that this is just a small part of your work. If this is just a small fragment of your work, we will have to see what you end up achieving, because it's very promising. Congrats. I will give the floor to all my colleagues. I just want to make a small remark and a short question. This is my remark. This process was partly made possible by the ideological alignment, because the Spanish government, the government in Andalusia, and the government of Seville, the three levels were led by the same party, the Socialist Party. A year before the Expo, there were municipal elections. The Socialist Party won, but they didn't make it to the town council. The mayor was Alejandro Rojas Marcos, not Luis, who's a psychiatrist who lives in New York. So Alejandro was not in agreement with the national level, and he used that. And there was some disagreement there. So this alignment was about to fail because of this disagreement. And I have a question. You touched upon this, but not fully. I'm going to focus on Seville. This process started approximately when Spain joined the EU. Do you think this project that required so many funds, do you think there was certainty that European funds were going to be available, or it was just considered with national funding and then European money was an extra? Or in other words, do you think the structural funds was absolute requirement for this event to take place? Please hand him the microphone. You can answer the questions. Shall we? No, we're going to go question by question. I think it's more efficient. Thank you very much, Juan Carlos. And then thanks for pointing out this mistake with Luis and Alejandro. I got the names wrong. I was probably thinking of another mayor in Seville. Yes, indeed. There was a coalition government in the city, and Rojas Marcos really complained about the problems of a mega event, but he wanted to relaunch his candidacy with Soledad Vega Cerril to opt for the Olympic Games in Seville. Not much is known about it, but this said, the question of the impact of the access of Spain to the European Union is very interesting. When this process started, the mention of Europe was very small. The first candidacy document mentions the Europe of regions in 1982, but indeed, when it is obvious that Spain is going to join the EU, that's when the Expo organizers realized that this new resource is going to be available that adds up to the previous project. But the works for the Expo don't start in 1982. They started in 1986, 1987, when Jacinto Arbellón, the new delegate council, starts his mandate. So the scale and the magnitude changes. I was talking about the high-speed train, and I think that the change of model, it was the contract of the century. This train was contracted to a French company, and that was a great Europeanization lever. And of course, the accession to the European Union didn't change everything. It just intensified the project. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I want to start by thanking you, Juan Carlos, the wonderful background that you provided. And I want to thank you, Amos, for your very interesting work. In my view, it's very important as it shows us that other side of Europe, the cultural aspect, Olympic Games and the World Fair. I will talk to you as a teacher. When I talk to my doctorate students, I like to mention the structure. I'm going to make a few recommendations. I missed first approach of the topic and methodological aspects. I am approaching this from a legal perspective. We use home sources, we use different sources of information, bibliographical sources, and this is very important when it comes to approaching your work. And when it comes to these methodological aspects, I would recommend you or suggest you to include some interviews as a source of research. I think that would give some added value to your work. And based on your vision and the depth of your study, maybe you could make improvement proposals. What could be improved? Not only conclusions, but also suggestions for improvement. I think that could be a very important contribution and an added value to your work. I think you're in a position to do that because you identified limitations, challenges, so that can help you extract potential improvements because there will be Olympic Games in the future. That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor, for your comments. Very interesting and very useful. I was hearing to the interventions and I was very excited because this feedback is very useful. Regarding the approach, I think there is indeed an absence of more depth. I wanted to be conservative because since I still need to fine-tune some methodological aspects, I want to implement the idea of network analysis, epistemic communities that I briefly introduced. I wanted to be very conservative when it comes to approaches. However, as I fine-tune my work, I will introduce more specific mentions to methodological aspects. There is a small there's a small footnote, but yeah, there are interviews. I interviewed Ignacio Montaños, Emilio Casinello, and some regional stakeholders like the president of the regional government of Andalusia. However, yes, more interviews are necessary, particularly grassroots stakeholders like neighbors organizations, because sometimes they provide a key testimony or witness experience. But of course, my research will tend to that. More modern historians have an easier time to interview protagonists. Regarding your suggestions, I am a historian, but I have a public policy interest because historians are more reluctant to recommendations. We tend to make general comments, but recommendations are much more complex. But however, I do have that public policy interest. I do have that. And so I am part of a European grant that is called Europa M. It's a network of European universities that focuses on public policies. So all of these mentions or all these comments connect me with another project that I'm involved in, that is community vegetable gardens in cities, improving urban habitats thanks to the use of spaces that are often self-managed, that come from local policies or the most basic grassroots level. So what I'm learning in my research is aimed at being implemented in public policies. Thank you very much, Professor Boussier.
I think your paper and your project is very good, but I think I can give you some help for Greece because, as you told, for Greece, Olympic Games are part of a cultural project. Mm-hmm. And if you look at Karamanlis, when Karamanlis decided to come back in Greece, and to make in France of Greece in Europe, Karamanlis, for him, the main reason for Greece to be in Europe was cultural.
Cultural, definitely.
You have a lot of about this, and his followers also. So if you look at the Olympic Game project is in the direct continuity with this. Second, you have perhaps to look I think it's in 1984 where Athens was a capital of European for culture. It was the role of Melina Mercouri. It was the first time, and it was a very important project. And for Greece, it was a main point. So probably, on a political point of view, you have a continuity between Karamanlis and his followers. And so, second, the project of Olympic game in Athens is supposed to have been very bad managed on a financial point of view. If you don't speak of this in your thesis or in your future book, you will have big problems. So you have to take in account this. And you have a political consequence. You told us at the beginning, you have a European flag everywhere. In 2010, Europe was devastated. So you have a complete change. So one of the results of the mismanagement of some project or financial budget in Greece is this one. So I can give you some connection with Karamanlis Foundations that has a paper of Karamanlis and his followers, and I think perhaps you can have a look inside. I can give you the name of the person.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Professor Boussier. Those were very thought-provoking comments, and I'll make notes of definitely everything you've mentioned. I'm gonna go through each of them. First, regarding the cultural aspect, definitely like. Well, even from the 19th century, in the time of independence from the Ottoman Empire, there was this sense of going back to the West, right? Like of especially connecting with this past of the classic antiquity to claim and to vindicate that role that Greece, especially ancient Greece, had in the construction of the Western civilization and definitely the construction of Europe. And Karamanlis in particular is very interesting because first he wanted the Olympic Games to be hosted in Greece permanently. In 1974, he said directly, "Why don't we just have them here always?" Was ruled out because the more internationalist message of the modern Olympic Games, but also. If you look at these cultural itineraries, this archaeological heritage that I mentioned before, they were not recovering or how do you say, restoring that much, maybe some heritage from the Ottoman period. No, they were going to the archaeological heritage of the antiquity, which is the historical period that really connects them, or at least from a certain standpoint, with the Western world. Which is very interesting, but I definitely need to delve more into the precedents more because I only know some very superficial points. But then regarding this event that you mentioned, the capital of European culture, if I am saying their name right, that is very relevant, and I didn't know about this event, so thank you very much. This is an excellent precedent that I can delve into. And finally, regarding the role of the Olympic Games in the debt crisis of 2010, that is a fascinating topic. There is an article called "Creating the Scarecrow." Basically, at some point, it had some political purpose using the Olympic Games as a scarecrow to say everything was due to the Olympic Games. No. There were other structural problems that were revealed, but definitely the Olympic Games played a role. Actually, when the head of the International Olympic Committee went to Greece in 2010, that press conference was very, very tense because there were a lot of Greeks that felt that it was just not necessary the magnitude, the dimension of all those works, and the country was basically broke after that. And actually, there was a report that was, how do you say, commissioned by the New Democracy, the right-wing party, after the Games, that the IOC itself condemned or criticized, because they said basically that it was not accurate, to put it in right words, in beautiful words. So yeah, it created a lot of problems, and especially the management of the post-event was very problematic. So I think I should indeed delve more into that. So thank you.
The problem was, for Caramanli, the problem was not if antiquity is relevant. For him, is the use of historical past in the political
That's right.
discourse.
That's right.
But it was his aim, and you have a lot of people around him in that field.
Yes, there is definitely a narrative there. Yeah.
I've got a twofold question, or just one small comment and another question. Did you go into the exact sources where the European money came from to Seville and to Athens? Was it just the Regional Development Fund, or were there other European institutions involved? For instance, the European Investment Bank, which is another quite neat source of generating money for larger projects. And then secondly, I again would like to underline the European Capital of Culture concept, because the credit for the European Capital of Culture goes, of course, to this capital, but also to the European Union as the big donator. The word Europe is in the concept, you know, that's it. Whereas with regard to Seville, it's a World Expo. If the European Union was lucky, you would have found a small sign, this project was co-funded by the European Union, and so nobody would read it or at least reflect about it. And that applies to Athens as well. Olympic Games is a global thing, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So the PR value is also a question which could be addressed in this concept.
Thank you very much, Professor Albert. Those were very insightful comments. Yes, regarding the sources, these were very diverse and actually were integrated in these multi-annual programs, let's say if I say it right, community support frameworks. And those included the ERDF, the Regional Development Fund, which is the one that I usually highlight because it has the clearest territorial component. But definitely the European Investment Bank was also there, or she played a big role, for instance, in the building of this, the construction of this highway that I mentioned before, and also in Seville. Well, for instance, even after the construction of the high-speed train, it was benefited by but not only this, also the cohesion fund was relevant, especially obviously in the case of Greece, but also for the how could I say this? For the construction of, for instance, research facilities in the site of Expo 92 after the event. But the European capitals of culture are very relevant because they are explicitly European. And they are used explicitly to foster European identity. And it's interesting because there is usually a kind of a correlation. One of my other case study is the Expo 98 in Lisbon, which was preceded by the European Capital of Culture in Lisbon in 1994, and there is a link between the two. And in Madrid, there was the European Capital of Culture in 1992. Like at the same time. But it's interesting also to mention that besides all these investment in infrastructures, the European institutions deliberately use these events to promote a better image of themselves in a crucial context. The Treaty of Maastricht, the years before the failed project for a European constitution in the case of Greece. And there was, for instance, the Avenue of Europe. And to the present day, the headquarters of the Science Park are in a beautiful, maybe not so well preserved, but beautiful still community pavilion, or like the pavilion of the European community. And in 2004, not coincidentally, it was declared the European Year of Sports. So the EU tried to capitalize, tried to benefit also from these events, although obviously they had a global reach. Yes. Thank you.
Ignacio Fornaris de la Universidad de San Pablo.
My name is Ignacio Fornaris from University of Bologna and CEU San Pablo. When you talked about the mega events, there is a monography by Professor Carmen Chinchilla. It's called something along the lines of Olympic Games and, I don't know, something legal. She talks about a definition of a mega event and the big competition to get one of those and how administrations categorize them. I think it's something along the lines of exceptional events of public interest. Thank you, Ignacio. I will ask you for the whole reference afterwards. It's very different than maybe something I didn't focus on too much in my presentation because sometimes they require exceptional legal measures and tax exemptions. Because they are not subject to the consultation processes, unlike other urban planning processes. In one of the slides, you could see that the main concern of the Expo organizers was that the public opinion would vote against the La Cartuja park. And then the works would be delayed. So these processes are far from democratic, to say the least. Hello. Well, my question is about the two previous interventions. My name is Teresa Freixas. I think you know me already. So the thing is that those mega events take place at the same time as the participation of the civil society in whatever it is. So that can lead to delays in the works. But at the same time, we see how the citizens perceive the advances in their region, their municipalities. Do you cover that in your thesis? And then my second question, in both cases, there was some controversy about the use of the funds. And the control of the funds by Europe, and also the control of the local funds. That was very controversial. I haven't seen that in the case of Andalusia. I saw it in Greece. There were some financial scandals that led to the discredit of the politicians and the collapse of the PASOK. It wasn't the direct cause of the fall of the PASOK, but it contributed to it. Have you covered that in your thesis? Because those macro events that can be very conspicuous and they can project a positive image of the cities, of the places, but that can lead to controversies. Thank you. Professor Freixas, that was very interesting and relevant. About the civil society's participation, my supervisor insists upon it, and in the second draft of my thesis, we'll be talking about the aftermath of the events, and I will be talking about the participation of the civil society. So the idea is, yes, to include it as much as I can. And the challenge is how to get access to the sources. There are some critical voices that have started to evaluate, to assess it. Diamantino Garcia wrote about it in José Rodrigo de la Borbolla, the former president of Andalusia, kept those writings in his personal archive. So the civil society had something to say, played a key role. We were not aware. There was also another report, a report by the Court of Auditors about the use of the funds, and I will analyze it in further detail. In Athens, the International Olympic Committee, that has not been always exemplary in its attitude, drafted a report and analyzed the report by New Democracy. And yeah, that is something that we need to definitely cover in my thesis. My last reflection, I was talking with a Spanish geographer living in the UK, and she said, why after all these difficulties, many people use these mega events as development tools. She's an expert in the case of Valencia with the Arts and Science City. It's an iconic work. I give you that. But is it the best tool for a progress development project? I don't know. That's the question. Hello, Amos. My name is Raquel Ruiz from the Carlos III University in Madrid. Thank you. I found your presentation very interesting, very useful. You convey your passion. You were talking from the historiographic process, the Europeanization process, and the mega events in the consolidation of the European identity, which is one of the pillars of the public sphere. My comment to you, in case you find it useful and so to put it on the table, I was shocked to see that you chose those two mega events. They were important for from a local point of view, but also from the point of view of the media coverage. But maybe we can find that Europeanization process in other times in the European history. I work in politics, and we don't talk about macro events in my field. We talk about other events, such as, for example, international summits, the Conference of the Parties, the Olympic Games. But what happens after those are over? How are they perceived by the collective imagination? Thank you, Raquel. Very interesting. Sometimes these mega events pave the way for other smaller events. For example, I think in 1 or 2 weeks in Seville, there will be a summit, one of the Conference of the Parties summit in Seville. Or, for example, you could find the MTV Awards ceremony. So these are smaller events, and I will pay attention to other events and longer events in my thesis. Thank you. I can see some more hands were raised. We don't have time for more, but you can talk to Amos over dinner, over lunch, because those are networking spaces too, so that you can listen to your peers and you can talk to them. But we don't have time for more as of now. Thank you for your contribution. Thank you for your participation. We have a 3-minute break. And applause, please.